Hey, this is Mr. Mitchell. Let's talk about the four layers of the earth. You can see from the description, from the picture up here, that they are the crust, the mantle, the outer core, and the inner core. Scientists believe that denser materials happen to be in the center. Now, by denser materials, we're talking about the ones that are the heaviest. And the things that they think, the elements they think are in the center of the earth are iron and nickel. And these are heavy materials. And they believe whenever the earth did form, by whatever way it did form, that these materials sank to the center. Whenever we had whatever spinning around was involved in forming the earth. The less dense materials, the more dense was on the inside, and the less dense were all around it. So the less dense materials tended to gravitate more toward the surface. So less dense are the lighter materials, and the heavier materials gravitated toward the center. Now, it's hard for us to believe that some of the materials we find on the crust are not as heavy. I mean, we have some very heavy rocks and very heavy things here, but according to scientists, they're nothing as dense as you find in the center of the earth. From this separation of more dense in the center to less dense on the outside, the other layers of the earth formed. Now, how do scientists know what's inside these layers? Because no human has been below the crust. Well, a lot of knowledge is educated guesses, and some of the educated guesses comes from like earthquakes, earthquake waves. Whenever there's an earthquake on one part of the earth, whenever there's an earthquake on one part of the earth, then those waves actually travel through the earth. So if you have an earthquake here, it can be measured in other parts of the earth. So just because that's happening, then scientists can kind of reflect what the speed of these waves are making it through there, and they can make inferences about the Earth's layers and how dense each layer is that they know of. Now let's talk about each layer. First of all, we have the inner core. The inner core is a very dense ball of hot, solid metals. So the inner core is solid, and it is very hot. It stays solid because of all the pressure. You can imagine as the innermost layer and all this material around it and the whole entire earth spinning, rotating all the time, it has a lot of pressure in the center. So that's the reason scientists think that it is indeed a solid, because of all that pressure. Now let's talk about the outer core. The outer core is liquid. The reason they say it's liquid is because it's so hot. Now keep in mind, it's not going to be as hot as the center. The scientists think that the center stays solid because of all the pressure. But they don't think there's as much pressure on this outer core. You know, it's not exactly in the center, so scientists are thinking that it is indeed liquid. The pressure is high, but it's not quite as high as it is in the inner core. Next will be the mantle. The mantle is the thickest layer, and scientists give out the figure 1,700 miles or so. It is like paste. So it's kind of in between a solid and a liquid, kind of like gooey, tar-like substance. It is hotter. The mantle is hotter the closer it is to the core, and it's colder the closer it is to the crust. So you can imagine that paste would have different consistency wherever you happen to be. Now let's talk about the crust. The crust is the coolest of the layers. And as you know, the crust is going to be solid. Now, scientists are not including the oceans in the crust. They would say that the oceans are on top of the crust. So that does in fact mean that all of the crust would indeed be solid. It is the coolest of the layers, therefore it is solid. And it's kind of like an eggshell. It is the smallest of layers, and it is just on the outside. And you think of how much an egg there is underneath the shell. Most of an egg is not shelled. You just have this small layer. Same thing here with the earth. Most of the earth is underneath this crust for the shell, and the crust is just very small compared to all the others. And the scientists will say there are two kinds of crust. That there is continental crust, and I'll put this in a different coloring. There is continental crust. Sure enough, I've run out of space right there. Oh, please pardon that. Continental crust. And then there is oceanic crust, which of course the oceanic crust would be the crust under the ocean. And scientists say that the oceanic crust is a little bit thinner than the others. No human has ever been below the crust. It is the smallest of layers. Now the crust and upper mantle isn't continuous. In other words, the shell is cracked. And that's going to lead us to talking about tectonic plates. So the Earth's crust is not one solid layer. It's kind of like a cracked egg. And you can see from this picture down here where scientists think some of the major cracks are. In fact, I'm drawing where some of the cracks are from right there. And there's very solid evidence that these are where these cracks are. And that is something we will talk about on the next video. So, I hope you've learned a little bit about these the different layers of the Earth.